Oh, she's ready whenever we are. So Natasha, please turn on your camera if you're ready. She's sharing her screen. So Natasha is our first speaker. So Natasha Mers, Director of Disability Services, is joining us. There she is in the top left. Good morning, Natasha. We spend a great deal of time over this past 18 months in particular, collaborating with DHS, meeting with DHS. Felt like we met with them constantly. So we appreciate that opportunity to network with DHS and throw ideas out and get clarifications. And so we've appreciated a really strong relationship there. So welcome, Natasha. And I don't know if you have anybody helping you, but I will let you introduce them. Our process for questions is a little different than we thought. We do have this two-way communication, Natasha. So we're going to allow people to come up to the speaker, give feedback, ask questions. If questions are longer or more difficult, people can write them down. And maybe if we can't get them all answered, we will send them to you guys in writing, give you an opportunity to send them back to us. So good morning and welcome.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for the warm welcome. Happy to be here. As Julie said, my name is Natasha Mers, and I am the Director of the Disability Services Division at the Department of Human Services. And I, too, just have really appreciated the ability to connect with more leadership on a regular basis and get feedback and work together on solutions during the pandemic, and now solutions as we are still managing the pandemic, but trying to get back to some level of normalcy. So thank you very much. I have with me today, I'll be doing the presentation, but I have Sharon Guzman from my team who will be taking notes on some of your questions and feedback, because we want to make sure that I understand that and bring it back to my teams. So with that, I am going to share my screen and then kind of walk you through what my presentation looks like today.
We're having feedback, Natasha, so I'm trying to fix it.
All right, can you all hear see the home screen?
Hey, just give me 1 minute.
Sure.
I did, and then it only comes out of that. Just hold it. Now we don't have any feedback. We'll see how it goes. So Natasha, I think we're ready to try it. I think I can hold the microphone in a way to reduce the feedback. So go ahead and try to get started.
All right, will do. Let me just get my pulled up here. Just do a quick, I know sound check is a problem or on your end for feedback. Can you hear me okay? Can someone give me a thumbs up if you can? All right, great. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and dive in here. Just wanted to let folks know that I can't, when I'm in presentation mode, I can't see the chat. So just if you're putting stuff in there, we'll address it later and work with Julie. So good morning, we made it. I am really happy to be here today to talk about legislative updates, which include updates on informed choice and advancing positive support practices in Minnesota. So quick outline for my presentation today. I want to talk about kind of the big arching requirements in the 2021 session, including informed choice, and then also the legislation that is focused particularly on day and employment services. And going to talk a little bit about the workforce shortage, and if we have time, advancing person-centered system in Minnesota with the integration of positive support practices. We may not get to that last one, and so I sort of front-loaded the presentation with what I think you all would be the most interested in learning and talking through. As we work through each session, I am gonna ask you all to participate a little bit with me and seek your feedback. So I'll be kind of presenting a section and then asking some questions for you to consider and talk about at small groups at your table, and then invite you all to report out or send or talk to, have Julie report out or whatever kind of makes sense to you. But I really do want to hear from you all today. I've got also a fair amount of time, and I'm sure you don't want to hear me talking for the entire session till 10:45. So I hope you'll engage with me, and we'll use this feedback that you give me today as part of our the policy development and the work that's going on right now back in my division. Okay, so I know this might be a little fuzzy up on your screen, but I wanted to set a little bit of context for why we do the work we do and sort of our core values in the Disability Services Division with regard to services for people. So our big why is to help people with disabilities live, work, and enjoy life in ways that are most meaningful to them, and to build a system that advances choice for people with disabilities, real and meaningful choice, by offering individualized services and supports, using a strength-based system and optimizing capabilities, really focusing on strengths that people bring to their communities and to their lives, and trying to create services that support that optimization, improve access and build equity. We also at the department need to learn and adapt as people's expectations changes and legislation changes, policy changes, needs change. We need to have a dynamic system that's never static. And then within our learning and adapting, aligning policies, regulation, and funding to what we've learned. And, with those guiding principles of optimizing capability, improving access, and offering individualized services. So want to set also some context for a really historic package of legislative changes and new resources that came out of the 2021 session. So going back in time a little bit, we had the Jensen settlement and federal court oversight over the settlement agreement, as well as our Minnesota Olmstead plan. And those changes resulted in changes to state operated services, the elimination of aversive and deprivative procedures, and replacing that with positive supports. You all are certainly aware of the home and community-based settings rule, for which we needed to obtain CMS approval for our statewide transition plan, which we have. WIOA, state demographics and workforce pressures, and sustainability of services and supports. And I think it's important to just kind of trace a very high level arc of the service system as we know it. So in 1965 is when Medicare and Medicaid were passed into law. In the 1970s really began the disability justice movement, or the independent living and self-advocacy movement, with deinstitutionalization in Pennsylvania, particularly Willowbrook, as well as Minnesota. So in 1970, Minnesota passed the Developmental Disabilities Act. In 1981, the federal government authorized home and community-based waivers. So the waivers that we work with today as payment sources for services. 1982 was TEFRA, so also called the Katie Beckett waivers, where parents that don't meet Medicaid, families that don't meet Medicaid income eligibility guidelines can still pay a TEFRA premium and access Medicaid services for their children. In 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and of course we all know what an important piece of legislation that was. I look back and sometimes feel like 1990 was so late relative to some of the other changes, but 1999, we have the U.S. Supreme Court decision for Olmstead v. LC, and that's really the same, not the same Olmstead, but that's the genesis of states' Olmstead plans. So our Olmstead plan is built on the parameters that were identified in the Supreme Court decision, which applied the Americans with Disabilities Act to the home and community-based services system, essentially saying people with disabilities have a right to live in the most integrated setting possible. States have an obligation to make sure that they have services and supports that allow people to do that. And to do that, many states developed their Olmstead plan. And we in Minnesota developed our Olmstead plan in part out of the Jensen settlement. 2014, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services promulgated or published the final rule for having a person-centered system. So that's the HCBS final rule for which we have our transition plan. So I think most of you are aware of our Olmsted plan and some of the promises that we've made and are still working to implement, and they look really similar to kind of the core values slide that I showed. So just wanted to put that up there. And as we look at the context, there are past and ongoing projects that set the foundation for what we continue to move towards to help people have more choice and control and have services that support the way they want to live. Many of these were first implemented in 2015. So assessment and support planning, that would be colloquially known as our MnChoice's Universal Assessment for long-term care services and supports, or HCBS services. A common service menu that moves across the waivers so that if you are on the DD waiver, you have access to the same menu of services as people on the CADI waiver and vice versa. Provider standards, so moving enrollment of Medicaid providers out of the counties and into DHS. And of course, DWRS, which I know is a very favorite topic for this group and many other disability services providers. Those were all initiatives that were driven by the federal government telling Minnesota that that DHS needed to take more control over some of those core functions of the Medicaid system, and we couldn't delegate them exclusively to counties. Another foundational piece was the passage of the Employment First policy in 2014, and emphasis on competitive integrated employment for people with disabilities. And I know that our partners and Indeed are going to do a presentation later today, so I'm not going to focus as much on that because you'll have an opportunity to hear from them and all the people on my team about that. So I wanted to start off and just maybe spend 5 minutes and see if I could hear from you a little bit. What are some of the ways your organization has already adapted to these changes, knowing that there's been a lot coming at you since 2015 and will continue to be more changes as a result of 2021? And within that, what are changes you are seeing in the expectations of people you serve? So what I'd like to do is take about 5 minutes to get you all talking together at your tables, and then we'll reconvene, and I'd love to hear some feedback from all of you. All right, I'll give you all kind of a 1-minute warning to finish up your conversation and then invite you up to share with me.
So if people feel like they want to share, maybe you could start making your way, a couple people to the mic. So is anybody in the room willing to come on up and share? Is this even on? Is it working? Yeah. Lynn, thank you. Yay. Courage. We need courage, leadership courage.
Are you ready?
Yes, I am. Thanks for coming up.
Hi, Natasha. Lynn Megan with TSE and MOHR board member. Thank you for the history. That's so relative. And I'm an oldie, so I've been around for a long time with that. What I appreciate about all the changes that we've had is an appreciation and validation for what we have done for the last 30 years. We've had people in amazing jobs for over 30 years. We've provided great enrichment supports within our day training for years. So it's now that with the employment waiver, again, a validation for what we've done for years. And what that's done for people that we support is more recognition for them for the great things that they have been able to accomplish. They understand it better because their whole team understands the employment side better. So all we can do is move forward with it. So.
Awesome. Thank you very much for sharing. Anybody else? What else you got?
Hi, Natasha. I can represent the table that I was sitting at. So some of the ways that we've adapted to changes is just thinking about the WIOA process. That was a challenging process from the beginning, but a very great process for the people that we serve, working with the different vendors across the state to get those meetings in and have those conversations. And then leading from that is customized employment. We've struggled a little bit with our in-center programs, eliminating simulated work, having conversations about 14C certificates. But we've done some really great work to look at those systems as well regarding competitive employment and person-centered planning. Let's see. The other thing that we talked a little bit about is just more communication about all of these changes, all these things that are happening with waivers, PCT, WIOA, and just educating teams a little bit more. We see a little bit of resistance from our case managers and maybe some of other team members as well. So just as we learn it, continue to educate the other support members of the people that we serve. And that was it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Anything else anyone wants to share? Maybe anything about changing expectations that you're seeing, or if not, I'll move on to my next section. All right, we'll keep moving. Thank you very much for those of you that shared and participated. It's always really helpful, and I think makes it a little bit more of a lively discussion. So appreciate that. All right, I'm gonna get back to share screen here. All right, can someone confirm for me that you can see the let's hear from you slide? And if you could do it by saying something, that would be great.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
thank
Natasha.
you. Still working this out. All right, so let's talk about informed choice. This is a biggie. So the 2021 session included really new and specific requirements about informed choice. So I have pasted the language into these slides, but I'm certainly not going to read verbatim every slide, but I just wanted you to see what the language says and that you can refer back to it in your PowerPoint or obviously look it up in the statute itself. But I've got a summary slide here for you once I get there. So informed choice, this was really an initiative brought by the disability advocacy community. The department provided technical assistance as we do for any proposal where that's in our scope where people ask us for that. So informed choice requirements in the new 2021 legislation apply to 4 areas: employment and post-secondary education, opportunity to work and earn a competitive wage before being offered day services, and that choice being made at least annually, and independent living, so community living before provider controlled settings, technology to be able to be a technology first state and people be able to use technology in addition to or in lieu of in-person supports, and self-direction, the ability to be one's own employer before traditional services. So I'll certainly focus more on the employment pieces for this audience, but it's important for you all to know as providers that there are requirements for the department and that will become, and that will influence your work in all of these various sectors. So kind of some key points and summaries to the language I buzzed through on those slides was that the person using services gets tool, information, and opportunities to understand what their options are. So in formats that they can understand and in ways that include discussion of preferences, abilities, goals, and objectives. There are components where the information provided to the person needs to identify cultural needs and access to culturally responsive services, and information about benefits of individualized services and supports. So the requirements really are about providing, it looks at informed choice as a process, not a point in time. So the expectation with this legislation is that people are given multiple opportunities to receive information, make choices, change their mind, assess what's working and not working, and then dynamically make additional changes. Whether in the 4 domains that we talked about: self-direction, independent living, day and employment services, and access to technology. So a big component of this also includes experiential learning. So the ability to facilitate opportunities to see how other people are living their life and making choices, and really kind of get their hands metaphorically on what's going on and work with other people and kind of see what options are out in the world rather than only being told about it on a piece of paper or a fact sheet. So it is about the quality of the information presented, as well as kind of a dynamic process that allows a person to make different choices, that allows them to change their mind later, and that requires them to kind of decide and evaluate options. Another key component of that is when a person does make a choice to change settings or environment or services, that there's a detailed transition plan, and that when a person has barriers to identifying choices or understanding, that those barriers are identified and mitigated. And similarly, that there's time and timeliness to the consideration of options. So again, it's not just a one-shot deal at someone's annual assessment. It is kind of an ongoing conversation. And in order to do that, we really need to understand what people's life goals are, where they want to be across at the next stage of the life, where they want to be at their current stage. And so there's a big support planning component of this, obviously, for the lead agency and for DHS. I think we are challenged to provide information to people that is more accessible and understandable. I talk a lot about, we're lucky in Minnesota at having so many different options and services and ways that people can access services and different things that services can do for people. But we also have a system that, because we have so many of those options or choices, it's very difficult for people to understand how those services and supports could fit together to make a life. And so we suffer a bit from almost information overload that makes it difficult for people to really assess what they need and how. So one of the things that I'm really interested in understanding is what roles different parts of the system play in advancing informed choice for people. So I know for sure that, we as the policy division in the Department of Human Services have a key role in advancing informed choice for people and making sure that lead agencies have the tools and supports that they need to offer more informed choice. But I'm curious to hear from you all as providers. Do you feel you have a role in helping people make informed choices? And I know you do some of that already, but what do you think your role is, and what questions or reactions do you have to the ideas presented here related to informed choice? So why don't you all take, like I said, maybe a few minutes to talk about it at your table, and then I'll invite you all to come up and share some thoughts with me. This is a big deal and a complicated thing to try to move forward in our system. And we're really going to need your input today, but of course, over time, to figure out how to do this really well and make it meaningful for people and reasonable for providers. So take a little time to discuss, and then I'll give you a 1-minute warning and we'll talk about it as a group.
Yes or no? They have
When they say yeah. What do you want me to say? Yeah. She says she wants it, but she really doesn't. So when she's there and they ask her, yeah. It's like, okay, no, do you remember your experience at Walmart? Your last about 1 hour before you turn your back on people and they're all like, she worked at a hair salon about 3 weeks. It's like, how much to say for that? Because I know the person will say yes. But you don't really want that. The other one of the issues I have is sometimes we have a gentleman like that was just discharged for was having issues with another housemate. Was not discharging. It wasn't very often, but mom and dad moving her back to town. What rights does he have? His parents, the guardian, are saying no. Like when you're aware No, I didn't know it was on Sunday. Friday. Oh, no, Thursday. The staff came off. And the parents didn't want to go. And he was just, the driver said he just like. I know.
All right, I'll give you a 1-minute warning to wrap up your conversation and start figuring out who's gonna come up and report out.
They don't understand. Really should not, but he does do.
Nobody's better than
Yeah, so he has to go. So it's like, I'm bringing. This guy, who I know, he's not bringing.
All right, let's get started. I'm super curious to hear what your reactions are about roles, responsibilities of provider for advancing in voice, and questions and reactions generally to this piece of legislation.
We're working on this, Natasha. So is anybody willing to come share the discussion from your table? Lori's gonna be brave.
Hi, Natasha. I think the summary of what we were talking about is informed choice is something we've been working on for a long time, but it's really such a daunting job to do it when you're talking about people who have grown up without being able to have the broad variety of experiences that the rest of us have. And it's not just the provider. A lot of times with this, the onus falls on the day and employment provider to prove that informed choice. And it's really what we need is more support from county case managers, more support from families in order to do that. You know, we've seen it with people who really want to work and families don't support that. And, you know, one person on my team was sharing a story about somebody who just really wanted to work. The rest of the team was entirely against it, but we were able to give it a try. And she went out, she got a job, she tried it, and she realized this wasn't going to work for her. she wasn't ready to work in the community. But that's really, you know, that's one spectrum of informed choice. Informed choice is also, you know, you take somebody fishing and they realize they really love fishing, or they hate fishing and they never want to do it again. This is the big job that we have. So I think what we've got to think about is systems and processes that really meaningfully move the needle instead of creating a checkbox that everybody signs off on every year.
Yeah, I really think there's a lot of important points in what you just shared, but I think one is, you know, family or guardians can sometimes be champions, and sometimes that can be an obstacle for someone. And we really have to struggle and kind of work through as a whole system, you know, moving out of a power over guardianship model and into supported decision making, so people really can, when they're ready and when they want to, take some risks, try something new, have an experience, and then decide maybe it isn't for you, you know, or this particular person, or maybe it's not the right time or whatever. And I also think it's an important point that people that use services may have had limited experiences, and it's hard to get to informed choice, you know, for someone without those experiences, you've got to really focus on getting information. And I do think that's why the legislation focuses on a specific requirement for experiential learning, right? That it could be that you take a new job and determine it's not for you, or that maybe you have an experience of shadowing someone on a job and deciding if you want to explore it further. So thank you for that. That was really, really helpful and insightful. Anyone else?
I'm going to add one from our table. We were talking about how, in this dynamic time of policy change and really system redesign, it makes it a little bit more complex with informed choice too, because providers can sometimes feel a little bit disingenuous when we say, we want you to make the choices yourself and here are the menu of options. But if someone wants to choose something that's no longer going to be available because policy shifting and we're moving away from that, for example, it's hard at the same time as there's such dramatic system change happening. And so we just think it's important for the department to consider that. That's why, having enough time to really work with people in a person-centered way makes so much sense, to help them work through the experience of new things before they're kind of forced to make those changes. So.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think also comes back to what kind of information do people have, right? And if things are changing so quickly that professionals in the system don't fully understand or kind of, are still trying to learn, it's really hard to think about how we would help people have informed choice when things change dynamically and something that was a choice before now is not going to be, or is going to be limited going forward. So I think that's a really good call out. And I also think, informed choice also depends on the options that are available at that local level, right? Things that are available in Minneapolis may not be available in greater Minnesota. And so how does that informed choice, right? Like we have to think about people's choices being rooted in what experiences and things are available in the communities in which they choose to live. And that's going to, by necessity, create variation in options that people have to choose from. And so I think we think a lot about that too, is like, how do you make sure the policy or the procedures expands and builds on what's available in the community, so that we're also not setting up false hope for people by giving them a range of options that exist in the world, but don't exist in their community. Any other tables want to share or report out? All right, well, I'll keep us moving on to the next thing. Oh, Julie, go, Julie.
I was just going to say, I think we can move on. I will add one quick thing, as we move into informed choice and look at really giving people options, designing that service system in the background that's really flexible. So I can take that risk and I can make that choice. And if you fail forward or you try something new, you have those ports to go back to. A lot of times people are afraid to try things because they think they can't get back, or what if it doesn't work? And so just creating, as we continue to move forward, a flexible service system that doesn't kind of push people to follow the money. We don't want to follow the money. We don't want to follow what's safe. We want people to really have an experience. So, but I was just telling you could move on really, but I thought I'd add that since I was up here.
Well, I'm glad I coerced you back up to the mic. I think that's a really good point.
Natasha, you're muted. So if you're saying something really wise, we're missing it.
All right, thank you, Julie. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, and if I ask questions about tech, if you can say it verbally, because when I'm sharing, I can't see you all, so that is helpful. Thank you very much. And I wasn't saying anything wise. I was saying that I'm going to go a little bit deeper now into some of the day and employment related legislative changes in the 21 session. Same deal. I've included a lot of content here for reference points for you, but I'm going to kind of buzz through them so we can get to slide 17 to summarize the highlights. So the big overview is that the 2021 HHS Omnibus establishes a task force on eliminating subminimum wages, provider reinvention grant programs, and enhances or sort of beefs up the employment first implementation language. And I'll talk through status updates on each of those things. One thing I want to note is that all of these initiatives were funded through the enhanced federal match for the American Rescue Plan. So the federal funds that are funding these initiatives are a result of increased federal funding coming through ARPA in the form of enhanced match. It does mean that federal approval is required before DHS can actually start utilizing or spending the funds that the legislature allocated. We to date do not have approval on our statewide spending plan from CMS. And so we are looking at and concerned about the timing of federal approval may delay the dates identified in the authorizing statute for some of these initiatives. So we're certainly working with our legislative team on that. But I think when the effective dates were established in the 2021 session, we all made a collective assumption that we would have had federal approval by now, and we do not. We've also learned in the sort of subsequently that when the approval of the spending plan requires changes to particular waiver programs or other, other federally funded programs, we need to get authority from the feds under that particular program. So when our spending plan is approved, we may still need to seek federal approval for some things depending on what it is. And that's pretty technical, and I'm happy to talk through that with folks if they're curious. Probably not today, but that's kind of something we're dealing with in terms of implementation deadlines. So elimination of subminimum wage task force. So this was established to plan and make recommendations to phase out payment of subminimum wages to people with disabilities on or before August 1 of 2025. So we do plan to use the Secretary of State's process to create the task force and its membership. So we're currently, even though we can't access the funding that authorized this, we are doing everything we can to kind of situate ourselves to be able to move quickly when we can start accessing those funds. So just a status update where they're working, my team are working with the Secretary of State, developing a request for proposals to select a task force facilitator. So one thing that's really important to me is that, certainly DHS and DSD policy staff are going to be, as well as other folks, engaged in this task force, but I really want those staff to be able to be participants and be able to really listen and learn from the other members. And that's a really tough thing to do if you're also planning and, facilitating the task force. So we hope to have up some professional facilitation that allows for better collaboration between the department and other task force members as we work to develop recommendations. So we're aiming to post the required application on the Secretary of State's website in September. Following that, it will be open for 21 days for applicants to be considered in first review. We'll say the legislation also identifies specific organizations who shall have or will have a membership on the task force, and more is included within this. And so we'll look to request selections from more for membership on this task force in October, and Julia and Lynn and Mike will certainly be in more communication about that as time goes forward, but that's kind of what we're aiming for right now. So you can see the dates there that are identified in the legislation. And again, just same caveat, we're moving as quickly as we can, but we're sort of looking at what's possible under what timelines without additional resources at this particular point. So provider reinvention grants. So this was sort of a companion to the legislation for the elimination of subminimum wage task force. And the purpose of these grants is to establish a provider reinvention grant program to promote independence and increase opportunities for people with disabilities to earn competitive wages. So it's additional grant funding for providers to help transition away from non-competitive jobs and wages, and gives grants available to implement business plans to shift your business model, We're also looking for organizations to develop peer-to-peer mentoring for people with disabilities that are transitioning. So that's obviously a direct tie back to that experiential learning requirement in the informed choice legislation. And then also to help organizations develop provider to provider mentoring. So learning so that you all can learn from each other what other organizations have done and had success with, what's been challenging, where to focus time, effort, and energy. And then also, of course, organizations to conduct family outreach and education about this as well. So November 2021, criteria for evaluating grant applications finalized, and the grant must be complete by March 31, 2024. So status update on this one. We are currently developing a request for proposals to select an organization to provide the technical assistance to grant recipients, as well as executing the mentoring strategies, whether it's peer-to-peer mentoring and then organizational mentoring. We also need to align the family outreach and engagement activities with the other initiatives, and we're currently working on some definitions for criteria for provider grants. Certainly, as we have more to share, or we have some more draft RFP language, we will certainly want feedback from more regarding the RFP structure and the elements. And another note on this one is that legislation identifies that as a condition of receiving these grant funds, grantees must fully phase out the use of subminimum wage by April 1, 2024. So a couple changes here to additions to the Minnesota's existing employment first policy. At least annually, people will be offered to make informed choices regarding post-secondary education, work, and career goals. And waiver participants of working age, so disability waivers, will be offered the opportunity to work and earn a competitive wage before being offered exclusively day services. So those were some amendments there to that existing employment first policy, which I know you all are aware of. So I mentioned this in the beginning, but just wanted to make a note that E1 Minnesota is a partnership between the Department of Human Services, the Minnesota Department of Education, and the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development. So this partnership has been in existence for a while and is making really wonderful progress on aligning systems between these three departments and in order to advance competitive integrated employment. And you will hear a lot more about some of the cool and exciting stuff they're doing. So I'm gonna not spend time in my presentation, but look forward to you all hearing from them, because it's really great work, and I'm just so excited at the collaboration and the joint commitment to alignment of systems to make this easier for people and providers to navigate. All right, let's take another quick break and have you talk with each other and share out. What opportunities do you see from the passage of these new mandates? So the provider grants, the reinvention grants, the subminimum wage task force, and the additions requirements about post-secondary education and being offered options for competitive integrated employment at least once a year. I also am wondering, or would like to hear, what concerns do you have regarding the implementation of this language? And what else do you need from DHS? What you might need us to do or stop doing that would support your efforts? So take a few minutes to discuss that, and then I'll ask you to share out again. Actually, that's worked to our university.
Never was that. To get rid of the subminimum wage. That'd be awesome for me. Yeah. But it's not easy, it's work. It's work. So I have a question. This isn't that the case? Lori said something about basic research. Falls on down. But if I said it should, if I asked them, do you know what? It's like you're so far behind. Before we started, I said, now everyone is on board helping, right? So from $100 is Monday through Friday, noon to 3, so we got a meeting. Slow down our Sunday nights. So then they talked about, well, what are the options? It's called volunteer drivers. $25. And it's like he lives less than a mile. Yeah. So then I said, I went to RSVP that this person was going to work times in the summer. So volunteer driving up on Saturday days and the I volunteered twice. The home after a lot of more than the so it's like again, it's
All right, I'll give you all one more minute to kind of wrap up your conversations. Look like there's a lot of good conversations happening, and hope someone will come up and a few people come up and share out. All right, so feel free to come up if you've got something to share. I'd love to hear your reactions and your thoughts.
Okay, who wants to come up and share? Everybody's still chatting. Ah, thank you.
Hi, I just wanted to say that your grant opportunities are going to be really important for us as we transform into some other services. It's really expensive to be able to educate your staff and to be able to have the resources to be able to help people find jobs. There's, for many, many years, they were in a very protected environment. They had their jobs. They, some earned more than others, but they were pretty happy. So some people were really pushing the wheelbarrow forward because they liked what they did and they don't want to do anything different. So we really have to have a lot of good, solid information for guardians. And it would be really helpful too if case managers would come in, I think, more prepared for some of the changes that are happening. There's some that are just really informed and some of them that just really aren't. And so then it's up to the provider to educate them. And then we look kind of like the bad guy. So I really like the grant opportunities and look forward to when they're released so we can apply for them, because we've already spent a lot of money trying to get people up and educated. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that. That makes a lot of sense. And one thing that's not in my presentation, but I'll share that's relevant to your comments is the informed choice legislation also requires the department to provide, to develop and implement a mandatory training curriculum for case managers on informed choice. So, I mean, we'll look at it across the different domains, but I certainly appreciate that having case managers with better knowledge sets and better tools and an orientation of sort of advocating for those things is a really essential component of advancing informed choice, so that it doesn't all sit on the provider's shoulder or on the person's shoulders. We certainly don't want a system where the different roles in the system aren't aligned to the policy goal, and you all as providers have to look like the quote, bad person because you're trying to encourage and then push a person to do something that other parts of the team don't agree with. So I appreciate that.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name's Heidi Smith. I'm from Winona ORC. And our table kind of talked about, this is a wonderful opportunity for funding, so that's great. But one of the interesting things that are happening is folks are, wages are going up, which I guess is it's a good thing. But then they have to back down their hours because they're losing some of their other supports. And I think getting creative about how we marry those two ideas and transition people, because if you can get off services, that's great, but a lot of folks really need that additional support for different parts of their life. So I think that would be really helpful as a provider to provide those options for folks to have opportunities that doesn't, hinder them from having the other supports that they need.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, and I think, I am going to talk about some workforce pressures, which I know is a topic well familiar to you all, but so more to come on that in the next session. Yeah, welcome.
Hi.
Thank you. Hi.
Okay, I'm Tammy Haugen from Falls
Hi,
Diverse
Tammy.
Abilities Corporation in Thief River Falls. So we want to hang on to our choices as long as possible. And it is kind of funny to talk about informed choice while we're eliminating choices. We're discussing expanding choices, but we're eliminating choices through the elimination of 14C potentially. So I just want to point out that for those of us that are going to keep that in place as long as possible, because many people depend on that for their work, having a deadline pushed up to eliminate your certificate in order to get a grant, that will be, that will take some of us out of the consideration. So we wouldn't apply for that because of that issue. So just telling you.
No, I hear you, and I, asked for concerns, and I hear that loud and clear. That was an important part of the legislation in negotiations. That is a legislative mandate. But I get it that that particular requirement will influence or dictate how people choose to apply for it, or whether they choose to apply for those grants at all. And I certainly appreciate and hear loud and clear that there are families, there are providers who feel like moving into competitive integrated employment as an emphasis has the possibility of taking away choices for working under 14C certificates, as well as other types of work. I think one of the things we've talked a lot about, and that I think will be important, is also making sure that in the department we are building up alternatives and other types of services for people to have meaningful activities and meaningful lives during the day. And so we can't only focus on competitive integrated employment. We also have to make sure that day support services and other types of services are available, so people, if they're not wanting to be on a competitive integrated employment track, they have service options to have meaningful days and meaningful membership and community integration and participation. But I thank you for sharing that. That makes sense. Any other comments?
Natasha, it's Lynn again. One of the other concerns that we've heard from providers is just that there seems to be a lack of support for case managers understanding E1 Minnesota and the changes. And just like any change, I know that it's just a lot of information to share, but it might be helpful for us to hear what work is being done to assure that statewide there's been training and access by case managers who are really responsible for that service planning component and really helping make it happen. How are you rolling out training for that?
Yeah, that's a good and important question. I think if it's okay, I'll defer that to the presentation that you have coming up with Deed and Leslie and Ryan from my team. They'll be able to speak to in a lot more detail and with a lot more eloquence, kind of what's been done so far, what the plans are going forward for the future for training for case managers and preparation for E1. But I will just affirm, Lynn, what you're saying, that we definitely see the need for enhanced outreach and communication to case managers and other support planning professionals out there, that there are still gaps in kind of the vision for E1 as well as the nuts and bolts. And so I think that's an important point, and more to come on that piece later. Anybody else? All right, so let me go back and share here. All right. So wanted to talk a little bit about workforce, because I'm certainly aware of the absolute crisis out there in finding and retaining direct support professionals. And, all this discussion we've been having about enhancing informed choice and creating opportunities and choice for people, none of this works if we don't have enough people in the system to support people doing those things. And so I wanted to, wanted to talk through some of the things in the 2021 session that might take some steps towards alleviating the workforce shortage, but by no means do I think that it's going to do the job. I mean, I've been listening deeply to the bind and the complexity of the situation for providers. And, I myself think back to a meeting, that one of the regular meetings that I have with Julie and Lynn and Mike and others from MOHR, and Julie just expressing, we thought the workforce crisis was really significant and serious before COVID, and now it's almost a completely different and harder ballgame. That was comparing those two experiences is that it's much harder than it was even pre-COVID, and we knew certainly it was difficult and challenging then. So I wish I had a magic wand or a silver bullet where I could do something to take that away. But I know it's like many things, a long-term systems transformation that we need with new strategies and new investment. So I wanted to walk through some of the things that are happening out there that passed in the 2021 session with the ARP funds. But before I jump in, just, I think telling you what you already know, that data does very much support what providers are telling us about the severity and the direness of the situation related to having and recruiting and retaining direct support professionals and other important folks in your organizations. So in the year 2020, 52 people reported their reason for entering a nursing home was due to no paid caregiver available. Whether that was family being paid or just another professional. And then 21 people reported their reason for entering was due to not having any unpaid caregiver as well, which is, of course, these are not the outcomes we wish to see. And this data may not be fully representative of the severity, but it's the data we have available. Nurses, home health aides, and personal care aides are consistently listed as the most in-demand jobs on Indeed's occupations and demands list. And we continue to expect to see additional growth in the need for personal care support services. We do hope that the implementation of DWRS cost reporting, the CFSS cost reporting and rate framework, or PCA cost reporting and rate framework, as well as some of the surveys we've done and will continue to do on labor market, will help us in the department understand what it costs to provide these services and how those costs and how the components of rates do or don't affect the ability for people to pay wages that retain employees. And so over time, as we continue to get this data, it will allow us to make sure that those rates make sense for the costs, and therefore people have access to services and providers stay viable. So I do think there is, from a rate setting perspective, hope on the horizon to really implement cost-based rate systems and build on the work we've done together with DWRS. And I also wanted to just note, I've got some weird animations going on in my slides and it's skipping, so I'm sorry if I'm taking you on a visual roller coaster here, but wanted to make sure folks were aware of that we do have a cross-agency steering team related to workforce pressures that is kind of a component of the Olmsted subcabinet and includes members of DHS, the Department of Health, the Institute on Community Integration, SEIU, as well as disability leaders and their advocates. Want to point to a resource that I've listed here, or my staff have listed, Employee Recruitment and Retention Guidance Document. That may be helpful for you. I know from my conversations with more leadership that you all are trying all kinds of creative solutions beyond the obvious. And so it may be that that's not as useful because you've already knocked on that door, but I wanted to make sure people knew that was available and out there and a product of that work and collaboration, if that should be of interest to you. So the steering team has recommendation areas that they work on and meet regularly to move forward action on, including increased worker wages and benefits, expanding the worker pool or attracting new workers into the pool, better training for direct support professionals, increased job satisfaction, raising public awareness by promoting that these are good jobs and they're important jobs and they really provide a foundation and a backbone for all of society. Promote service innovation and enhance our data collection so that we can continue to understand the problems in their proper context with that data. So again, just the workforce shortage initiatives are included as they're in part of our strategic planning, because again, we understand that if there aren't people out there to do the work, we can have the greatest policies and procedures in the world and it won't make a difference. So we do continue to work and try to collaborate with other agencies and collaborate with providers to identify those and create solutions, but it's hard. One of the strategies we've used is innovation grants with that sort of dedicated or focused effort on funding agencies or organizations that are trying to do new things related to workforce. And grant awardees include the Institute of Community Integration at the U of M, Central Minnesota Jobs and Training Services, and the Minnesota Deaf Muslim Community Deaf Gain Innovations Program. The other thing I wanted to mention from kind of a big picture systems perspective that has some influence on the workforce is collaborative safety, or what we also term culture of safety. And this is a model that draws from safety science in safety critical industries such as aviation and nuclear power. It's a different way to look at how to address a problem when something went wrong. So in the human services context, we might think about this as when something happened that we didn't plan for or expect, and the person experienced a negative outcome. Or maybe a quick, hand way to look at that is when you have to make a report to, adult protection or licensing about something that happened and didn't go the way it was supposed to go. So our current regulatory system uses a punishment approach, right, where there's an investigation, a determination of who did something wrong, did someone do something wrong? And the remedy is also often, retraining or sometimes punishing the individual actor that did the wrong thing. And that may be appropriate in some or certain circumstances, but it also doesn't help us understand what systemic drivers are leading to these poor outcomes. And it makes it very difficult for us to actually learn from mistakes or near misses. And so culture of safety represents sort of a philosophy or a different approach to how we learn from and understand critical incidents that occurred. This approach addresses typical underlying systemic factors and helps agencies say, what part of how we've set up our systems or our staffing or what policies and procedures that the department has, promulgated had an influence in creating a bad outcome. So from these incidents, we can map out changes that we might need to see on a systemic level, because often what happens in these situations is the direct support professional that made the mistake and bears the brunt of the punishment, they're also the least empowered and often the lowest paid person in that organization. So how do we create accountability outside of the context of punishment so that we can actually move forward together as actors in the system to create better outcomes for people and identify what needs to change? So for agencies that sort of employ a culture of safety approach to critical incidents, we do find that retention improves. And that can be one strategy to assist with this really daunting challenge. So we have a pilot to test the collaborative safety model for investigating critical incidents such as medication errors, or when there was a wheelchair safety incident. Other examples of incidents they've looked at are involuntary demissions or termination of services, as well as staff falling asleep. So in those sort of categories of critical incidents, participants in the pilot will look at a particular incident and do what's called a mapping, where they work with a safety analyst that's been trained in a collaborative safety model to map out all the different touch points in the system that were created or resulted in the critical incident or the bad outcome. So you can see a list of participating counties that have partnered with us in this, and I'm really excited about culture of safety and collaborative safety as a model to work together towards understanding what changes need to be made in the system. So it isn't just about looking at the providers, an individual provider's policies and procedures, but it's looking a lot more broadly on, what happened before then, what are the rules and regulations that may be influencing how a provider makes decisions about setting up their residential setting or their day support center. And what role did the county play in this, and what role did the provider, and what role did a family play, and how are those touch points? How do we learn to understand things in a much more nuanced and detailed way, because complicated systems require complicated changes, right? Punishing one particular person may be appropriate depending on the type of incident, but it doesn't do anything to improve the system overall. So moving away quickly from culture of safety and talking a little bit about technology, this is informed choice for technology, or to use technology as part of that legislation we talked about. But I think it's also a key strategy to address workforce shortages, which isn't by any means a new thought or new idea, but really thinking about how can we make it easier to access technology for things like overnight supervision, or for people to be able to get support, ongoing support in their job without maybe having a one-to-one person with there all the time. So we have a Minnesota Technology First Advisory Task Force, and they've have a report that is working its way through our internal process and should be published shortly with additional recommendations for what needs to happen. So stay on the lookout for that. So again, this is a reference slide. I'm not going to read through it for you because that's a lot of content, but just as the note of some of the different rate increases that occurred as a result of the 2021 session, for rate increases on the elderly waiver and AC side of town, as well as DWRS, modifying of inflationary adjustments, and other changes. So you can see a link right there if you want to go a little bit deeper into what the DWRS wage and base wage and index standards are, which therefore inform the components of the rate framework and automatic adjustments. Similarly, some really exciting investment that we haven't seen historically for home care services. So home health agency providing annual inflationary updates, increased payments for home care nursing services, so services delivered not in institutional settings, but in the community, and payment for home care services, as well as a 5% rate increase for ICFDDs that modifies the rates and procedures related to variable rates and includes services during the day. So certainly that's obviously a great improvement, but it's, ICF rate setting is in services during the day is a very technically complex area. So if you have particular questions or you want to understand that more, please feel free to reach out to us or work through more leadership to make sure we can connect you with our rate setting and policy experts for ICFDD. Also really exciting from a rate perspective is enhancements to the PCA rate, and PCA will eventually transition to community first services and supports. So rate increases that apply to PCA will in turn apply equally to CFSS when we make that transition to that program. But more excitingly, I think from my perspective, is the establishment of a rate framework for PCA/CFSS. Unlike DWRS, which has automatic inflation adjustments and certain component values that are based on costs, or and will continue to evolve based on costs that we know from the DWRS cost reporting. Prior to this legislation, PCA rates were just set. It was one rate. There was no legislation that authorized cost of living increases or any type of progression, and the rate was established a long time ago and not necessarily based on what it actually costs to provide the service. So the establishment of a rate framework is really about the long-term sustainability of that program, and trying to set up a system where we're not going back to the legislature every legislative session trying to cross our fingers and hope that they'll find money to fund PCA rate increases. So this is a really good thing from a long-term systems perspective, as well as the ability to have an immediate rate increase after we get federal approval for the spending plan and then approval within the particular authority that we need. 2021 session also resumed temporary funding for the ability to pay for PCA services to be paid to, or that spouses can provide PCA services to their spouses, and parents of minor children can be paid and compensated for that. During the pandemic, we did implement temporary COVID-related authority that allowed for those payments under our state plan authority, but we hope under CFSS to make that permanent with this legislative authorization. And I think I'm gonna kind of skip this, but just hear that I've talked a lot through this already, but this is just good information for reference. Also, with the ARP funding, there have been additional grants to directly address the workforce shortage. So HCBS workforce development grants. So you can see there's a fair bit of amount appropriated there for fiscal years 23 and 24. Related to attracting and maintaining direct care workers who provide HCBS services. So certainly as we move forward in development of what that grant program looks like, we are going to need a lot of input from you and other service providers to make sure we're kind of looking at the right things and the structure of the grant program makes sense. Grants for technology for home and community-based services recipients, so people with disabilities and our senior citizens to access internet services and other resources necessary to appropriately utilize technology. So you can certainly see there the tie back to this is one strategy to implement informed choice for technology. Certainly not the only one, but a key and important resource. And then provider capacity grants for rural and underserved communities, again, based on federal approval. Grant programs to increase the diversity and capacity of providers to serve people from different culturally specific communities and in rural or otherwise underserved communities. Knowing that workforce is a challenge across the state, but it is also extremely acute in places where there's less population density in greater Minnesota. So again, just wanted to point that to a couple different resources there for you all. I'll do my time check here. Okay. And wanted to just remind people about Direct Support Connect. I think most of you are aware of that kind of online job matching board, but if you're not, please check it out. It's a great resource, and we're always looking for more people to be interested and use that service and that connection. So I'm going to stop sharing there and just do a check-in with all of you. I have some other slides about the integration of positive support practices, but I know I'm about pretty close to the end of my time. Hold on, let me stop sharing. So I wanted to check in with our conference presenters and see if kind of you'd be interested in talking about the future of positive supports in Minnesota, or if you want to take the last 10 minutes just for Q&A.
Let's do a little Q&A. Hang on, we got some questions in writing, so let me gather some of them and we'll. I'm surprised it took this long before this one came up. So the first question is, what is DHS's response or direction for providers re federal administration executive orders regarding COVID vaccine mandates, all of that testing mandate?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and I'm not going to be able to give you a super solid answer. I think we are still ourselves analyzing the federal guidance that's coming down and trying to understand what impacts it has on home and community-based services providers and us as a Medicaid agency in terms of what we need to do to maintain compliance with that mandate. So the short answer is we don't know yet, but we certainly understand that it's something you all are very worried about. I've definitely heard from providers and understand that mask mandates have a direct impact on your ability to retain direct support professionals, and that there's a direct connection there for staff that may not want to wear masks or not feel comfortable being vaccinated. So, you know, I wish I had words of wisdom here for you, but we in the department are learning and figuring this out along with you in real time. And as soon as we have some more information to share and some analysis that we think is meaningful that you can rely on, we'll be reaching out.
Thanks, Natasha. You talked about MOHR having specific called out representation on the subminimum wage group, but on the workforce committee, are there specific groups of individuals that have representation on that? Does MOHR have a spot on the workforce committee, or is there not that specific?
Oh, on the workforce, the task force that I mentioned as a part of the Olmsted subcabinet, is it? Yep. Is that one?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that.
Not the agency one, not the cross agency one, but as we move forward and talk about the workforce development grants and all of that, is that going to go through a similar process?
You know, let me get back to you all on that one. Those are a little bit farther out in the future, so I don't know that I even totally know right now. I would need to take a look at that, but certainly we can get back to you in writing with that answer. I just would want to touch base with my staff and figure out what the requirements are, and then if we've had any conversations about how to implement them.
Thank you. Can you provide an update on the timing for the waiver reimagine advisory committee, kind of forming that new committee and the process for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually have slides that I won't share, but let me get onto them to make sure, because I know I had some updates on that. Okay, so similarly, we do intend and have got the ball rolling on using the Secretary of State's website or the Secretary of State process for that waiver reimagined task force. So we're in the process right now of getting an application stood up and working with the staff from the Secretary of State's office to get those requirements and get the applications up and out. And so as soon as they're ready, we will definitely be reaching out to MOHR as well as other key stakeholders to encourage people to apply. And also, you know, there are requirements within that task force that there are families that use services and people with disabilities. And we may also be looking to you for any ideas about who we might be able to reach out to. I mean, we certainly have our own networks, but also want to maybe hear from you about that as well. I think, you know, the task force is a really important part of our stakeholder engagement, but one thing I did learn, and we heard loud and clear from phase one of Waiver Reimagine, was that the online engagement that we had done in public engagement really wasn't sufficient to address people's concerns. So I think the task force will be a key strategy. I anticipate, you know, again, some professional facilitation of the task force so that DHS staff can really, DSD staff particularly, can really be there and listen and engage with all of you or the members of the task force. I also anticipate that the task force won't, it's in and of itself, be sufficient to get the input that we need from stakeholders with a change as big as Waiver Reimagine. And so be looking for other opportunities that you might be seeing to participate as well as the task force. I'm also anticipating, you know, that the legislation of the task force has certain things that the task force must address, for example, exception policies or budget exceptions and things like that. So there probably will also be the opportunity to have members of that committee tasked with reaching out to other providers or other stakeholders on a particular issue, gaining feedback, and then bringing that back to the larger committee. So I'm hoping that it's kind of the advisory committee is kind of the home base for real engagement with especially professionals in the system as well as others named there, but that we are having also additional and other opportunities, because not everyone obviously has the time or can be a member of the task force. And this is a big deal, and we realize the level and scope of systems change that Waiver Reimagine is creating. And so we want to make sure that our engagement strategies really match that, as well as really doing better on engagement with diverse and underrepresented communities.
It's always good to hear that we'll have wide representation on all of those things, you know, the special minimum wage task force and all those task force people receiving the services, people who are on the ground dealing with that impact. And so having a wide range of people and having an opportunity to hear direct input is good. We got another question, but it's related to E1MN. So we'll hang on to that until Ryan and the deed folks do the presentation. So does anybody else have anything they want to ask? Natasha's got about 5 more minutes. So anything else from Natasha?
Hi, Lynn again. Thank you for beginning to address the workforce issues. You know, I think that we have some very valuable information inside this room. We have and speaking to informed choice, we have so many individuals that we support who are not able to come back to our service yet because we don't have staff. So, you know, if we need to give you stats and statistics, and, you know, we just feel so bad for the people. And again, their teams don't understand why. So we look like the bad people for not doing it. And we're doing anything and everything, you know, going above and beyond in increasing our wages to be able to attract people. And it's trickles that we're getting. So we just, you know, if you need more information from us, we're happy to provide that.
No, I really appreciate that. And that's very consistent with what I'm hearing from more leadership at our regular meetings with, having waiting lists and what some of the vacancy rates you all have right now, which are really staggering, and talking through all the things that you have tried and that it's not really sticking right now. So, I don't know that we always want more data in the department. That's first and foremost. I would never say don't give us data, because anytime we have data and we can correlate it with our other data, that's valuable. But I'll say as a general matter, I think we all understand that the workforce crisis is here, and it's real, and it's affecting people that use services directly. It's affecting you all. It's affecting the staff that are hanging in with you in terms of having to work longer, being more pressured, having to pay overtime. Burnout is a huge thing, as well as, direct support professionals have also gone through COVID and trauma, and all of that impacts the ability to recruit and retain them. Would be really curious or really interested to have some deeper conversations about what has shown some hope for success, or what else is needed. I recognize that many or all of you have tried and are trying all of the traditional things we would jump to and think about: raising wages, hiring bonuses, things like that. So the question, that I think would be the most helpful to engage on is, okay, none of those things are moving the needle in a way that we want. And so what else, right? What else do we need to do? What kind of creative solutions do we have? What other options are there on the table? So certainly we'd be really happy to engage. I would, we can work through, obviously, Julie and Lynn and leadership, and connect you with the people that are doing the workforce work as well. And that might be a really good opportunity for us to think and learn together about this really complex problem.
Thank you. We don't have any other questions in the room, so I think you got like 2 minutes left. So if there's any parting words that you want to leave us with before we move on to the next presentation, but thank you for sharing that information. Thank you for presenting here for us today.
Yeah, you are most welcome. Thank you for all you do for people in Minnesota. Thank you very much for all your work during COVID and after. I know it's been a huge challenge. I've been just so impressed with the provider community's ability to adapt and survive. And I know that it's been an extreme challenge. So my hat's off to you, and I look forward to future conversations and ongoing collaboration between the department and more. Thank you all.
We're going to take a quick 15-minute break before the next presentation. So we'll talk about E1MN next, but you've got about 15 minutes to go do whatever it is you need to do.
I would like to. What is that? We need competitive wages. But you gotta be able to get the revenue to meet your expenses. Okay, so that's the rating, is a rolling rate. What's that really gonna mean? That's. Then you. Yeah. Okay, so here's the thing. New people coming in. Oh, I don't want insurance. I'm on state insurance. That's all they. Okay. So, Rob Peter, they haul. Decent rate. Let us manage it instead of the state managing it. For instance, the free fuel assistance. I know. And they do. One yellow fire.
Okay, you guys, we'll give you a warning. We're going to have Ryan come on here in just a few seconds. So if you want to get what you need and come back to your table. We have people wandering back into the room. It has been so long since we've seen each other in person. It's kind of hard to tear yourself apart from your colleagues that you've been seeing in a long time.
Yeah, for sure. No worries. We will.
All right, you guys, quiet down so I can introduce our next speakers. All right, there we go. So we have a whole bunch of faces on the screen. So I may not have the right presenters, but we have Ryan Mers and Leslie Kirchhoff from DHS and Chris McVeigh and Amanda Jensen-Stahl from DEED going to talk about E1MN today. And I know we have a ton of questions about this. So everybody's looking forward to this presentation. So thank you for joining us and presenting to us today.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction, and super happy to be presenting in a virtual fashion today. This is I think this is new for me, being virtual to an in-person room. So it's kind of an exciting experiment, but hopefully we've got some good content for you today. I'm going to maybe just introduce ourselves, do a round of introductions, and then we'll get started in the content. So good morning, everyone. My name is Ryan Mers. I'm our Employment Planning and Resource Coordinator for the Disability Services Division at DHS. Excited to be giving an update on our interagency partnership, E1MN, to improve employment first. So I'm going to pass it over to, I guess, Amanda to introduce herself.
Thanks, Ryan. Hi, good morning, everyone. Amanda Jensen-Stahl, and I work for DEED BRS, and I'm the manager of interagency partnerships and business engagement, but have been spending a lot of time working on E1MN. So really happy to give an update this morning. I'm going to pass it to Chris McVeigh.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Chris McVeigh. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives for DEED BRS, Vocational Rehabilitation Services. This indeed does feel very strange. Living in our COVID world, my preference, and all of my colleagues know this, is I desperately want to see people. And I wish I were with you all, but happy to join via Zoom today. Passing it on to Leslie Kirchhoff.
Hey, hi all, Leslie Kirchhoff. I'm a manager at Disability Services Division, and I work with Ryan on this effort, and we all are part of the E1MN steering committee. So we help drive this effort behind the scenes to make sure we keep plowing away at our mission and our goals. So really excited to be here today. Thanks for inviting us.
All right, we've got a PowerPoint to guide our time today. So let's see if I can get that up. And I think I pass it over to you, Amanda, right? To get us started.
Yeah. Thanks, Ryan. So you can go ahead and advance it to the first. So Ryan and I have some slides. We want to provide just a high-level overview of E1MN, provide some updates, and then a little direction on where we're headed. I know that we got a few questions ahead of time, so thank you. So we'll address those and then hopefully we'll have time. It sounds like you have other questions, so we're really happy to answer other questions. I'm sure you're all very familiar with E1MN at this point, but just wanted to set the stage again that E1MN is that state agency partnership advancing employment first. So it's DHS, it's MDE and DEED all working together to deliver a more seamless and timely employment support system. Next slide, Ryan. Thank you. And really wanted to highlight and share our vision is that we will work together to align our system so that common customers who receive home and community-based service disability waivers and vocational rehabilitation services from DEED VRS or SSB get seamless and timely supports to make informed choice and meet competitive integrated employment goals. And so one of the key messages as we have been providing information through whether it's a coffee chat or other presentations or the trainings that we've done is really highlighting that under this E1MN umbrella, we're really talking about folks on a waiver who are looking for competitive integrated employment. Next slide, Ryan. So just a reminder of the areas of work that we have been working on for the past, really it's been a couple of years now, and really focusing on that service sequencing. So how do waiver services work together with VR services and school services? So clarifying the sequence of services for people in school and out of school, and really being clear on who pays for what and when. Provider alignment, this one is really important, and we've been working on how do we build a shared network of employment service providers across waiver, which is, as you all know, requires 245D licensing, and VRS and SSB, and we have a PT contracting system to improve access and support smoother transition. So our ultimate goal is that most providers will have both. They'll be 245D licensed and have a PT contract with VRS and SSB. Thinking about that referral process and customer flow, being able to provide a clear process for referrals between programs in order to really achieve that goal of seamless delivery of services and supports for that person. So the goal is that somebody is receiving the services that they need when they need it, and that we've got things lined up behind the scenes so that just happens. And so the person is just getting what they need, and there aren't delays and there aren't barriers to getting what they need. Tools and resources. Ryan's going to be sharing and highlighting many of the tools and resources that we've developed that hopefully you all have seen and have started to use, but we knew that it was really important to embed person-centered tools that move with the person. So as they move through whatever those services and supports that they need, in order to support the continuity of services and that common conversation about employment, so that things move with the person so they don't have to repeat or duplicate or feel like they're having unnecessary conversations to get other people up to speed. And then finally, training. We will talk a little bit more later about the trainings that are available, the trainings that we've done, and what you can expect or anticipate moving forward. So this is our engage, plan, find, keep framework. Again, we know that many of you have seen this, you're very familiar with this, but we always like to walk through this and highlight this because it's such a core foundational piece, and it's something that is really helpful as we all, I'm with VRS, Ryan's with DHS, you all are all providers, and it's that shared common ground that we can all look to and use as we think about E1MN and we think about working with people on waivers who want competitive integrated employment. And so this one is for adults. And we define that as people on waivers who are not enrolled in high school or age 18 to 21 transition programming. And then this framework highlights who's responsible for what. So you'll see we've got waiver in that kind of purple color, and then VRS and SSB in sort of that kind of orange brown color. And so under Engage, it's funded by, you can see the waiver, and it's that waiver employment exploration services, which results in an informed choice. And so at this stage, somebody may be needing to talk about barriers and concerns and having those addressed, really talking about their lived experience and the risks and benefits of choice. And so thinking through, maybe they're just not sure, and being able to have some services and supports to help them as they make that informed choice. The plan phase, which is again funded by the waiver, waiver employment development services, that planning phase, this is going to result in those preliminary employment goals. And the goal is to have a portfolio to really springboard to that job search, really helping somebody who is saying, I want competitive integrated employment, but maybe hasn't had any experience doing that, or they're just not sure. They need to explore that a little bit more to understand what is that employment goal going to look like, and really helping them build the foundation for their job search. In FIND, that's where the funding and the responsibility, you can see, switches to VRS or SSB, and that we are funding that job search through stability, and it's resulting in competitive integrated employment. And so many of you are familiar with VRS and SSBs. We have a PBA. For VRS, we created that E1 PBA, and then SSB has their own PBA structure, and that's how we pay for job placement services. And then KEEP is back to the waiver, and it's really to help people who need long-term supports to maintain employment, and that's funded under waiver employment services. The one thing that we want to emphasize, having a framework like this is really helpful to kind of see those different phases, and where if somebody's in plan, trying to provide that clarity around who's responsible for paying for those services and what that looks like. But it's really important to know that people can come in at any point. We don't want this to feel or be a linear process where somebody has to do step A, step B, and step C. So if somebody really is ready to move into a job search, they can come in at FIND. And so it's really meant to be flexible to meet the person where they're at. And again, making sure that that person gets the services they need when they need it. So this is the adult framework. On the next slide, I'll highlight really quickly what it looks like for students. So it's that same framework: engage, plan, find, keep. But this is for students, and we define that as students who are enrolled in high school or age 18 to 21 transition programming. And you'll see we've got waiver again in that purple, plus school district. So now we're adding in MDE, the school district funding. And then you'll see that same kind of brown color for VRS SSB with school districts. And you'll see that it's the same framework, but who is funding engage, plan, and find is now VRS and SSB with school districts. And so school and VR transition and pre-employment transition services are really taking that engage and plan phase. And what that'll result in is graduating with a person-centered plan for post-secondary education, employment, and independent living. The find is, again, you'll see it's VRS and school districts, and that it's school work-based learning programs and VRS SSB work-based learning and or job search, again, through that stability services. And the intent here is competitive integrated employment. Now with KEEP, this is a little different. And so in terms of if student, and again, defined as someone in high school or age 18 to 21 transition programming, if they have a job and they need those long-term supports, if it's outside school hours, waiver employment support services are available to fund. However, if it's during school hours, then it would be school transition services that would be responsible for funding those services. And again, resulting in maintaining employment. So next slide. So just a quick highlight of VRS and SSB updates. So I mentioned that E1 PBA. Hopefully you all, for those of you who are providers with VRS, have a PT contract with us, were able to attend or get the information on the training of what that E1 PBA looks like. And we did that back at the end of June, on June 29th. So we were able to provide training on that E1 PBA for not only VRS staff, but all of our employment service providers. And then July 1st, that E1 PBA became available, as well as we still have our general PBA. So for folks that aren't on a waiver, they will just continue to receive the general PBA funding. But individuals as of July 1st, if they have a waiver, then the E1 PBA is available. And the nice thing is we didn't have to do any contract amendments or anything. We were able to just have that go live July 1st. If you don't have that information or you missed it, we put a link so you have access to the slides, that E1 PBA information, the training, as well as there's a really helpful FAQ is on our website. So that link will take you right to where that's at. And then finally, as part of this E1MN work, each of our VRS teams, as well as SSB, we created what's called a waiver liaison role. And so and it looks a little different from team to team. So if you look at the list, you'll see that some teams are designating them by county, some are just by team. It's really meant to meet the needs of the teams across the state. But the goal here is to have staff from each team be the experts and the go-to around E1MN, and be able to be a point person for questions about referrals, questions for consultation, and just be a point person around E1MN. And so if you are ever wondering who is that liaison for a particular region or team, that is the link that'll take you right to the list. So that is it for the kind of high level VRS and SSB updates. I'm going to turn it over to Ryan, who's going to talk about some DHS specific updates, and then dive into some of the tools, resources, and training.
All right, great. Thanks, Amanda. So for this DHS section, what I really wanted to do on this slide is just highlight the kind of key guidance points for reference. So I don't want to go into them or start opening them up to look at it, but wanted to give kind of these three grounding documents that I think are really helpful if you're looking for, hey, what's the nitty gritty and what changed policy wise with E1MN. So in July of this last year, similar timing is that E1 PBA, we published an e-list that announced guidance changes and new HCPC codes for waiver services. So you can see that e-list, which sort of provides a summary of, hey, here's what's changed and here's what to expect ahead for implementation. And then, associated CBSM pages are the Employment Development Services CBSM page. We created a plan and a find section in that CBSM page. So there was an edit there. And then as well as what used to be the interim guidance in working across waiver, vocational rehabilitation services, state services for the blind, and school services was replaced with just the guidance for employment service authorization. So instead of an interim guidance, an ongoing guidance. And that's a really helpful resource if you're looking at what, that service sequencing, taking that engage, plan, find, keep framework and applying it to waiver services context, or getting more specific with it. So those are, if you're looking at that nitty gritty policy change, those are some really helpful resources to go in and review that to see the language from the DHSN. So, we've done a lot of implementation activities, webinars, coffee chats, training events, and that sort of stuff. But wanted to take some time right now to look at what you can expect in the months ahead. So first is, for those of you that have been attending our coffee chat webinars, we think those have been a really great resource. We've got super good questions from them. And we've been holding them on a monthly basis, I think the third Thursday of every month for the past, since April. So for over the course of the summer, but we have our last scheduled coffee chat on September 23rd. So you can mark your calendars. I'll be going into our Disability Hub MN work toolkit. So I'll show you where you can register for that and get the contact and get the information. But next week is our last coffee chat. Second, right now we're working on E1MN training modules. So right now we've got some resources up on that same work toolkit for training, to audience-specific training for service providers, for case managers, for VR counselors. Right now, we're working on synthesizing some of that information into on-demand training modules so that people can access like videos of training, when they need it. It's going to be, I think the initial ones are focused around, roles and responsibilities of different team members and collaborating. So we're putting together those training modules that'll be available this fall. Third is we're setting up a series of regional collaboration meetings. So basically setting up kind of 5 regions in Minnesota and then hosting collaboration meetings for lead agencies, service providers, both VR and waiver, as well as lead agencies, service providers, and VRS and SSB offices. So those regional collaboration meetings, the first one is scheduled for November. We'll have a series of 3, so we'll give it a couple months between each collaboration meeting. And the first one is scheduled for November, either late this week or maybe early next week. There'll be a save the date coming out to hold sometimes in your calendars for depending on what region you're providing services in. So you can look forward to that save the date coming out shortly here, and those regional collaboration meetings happening with the understanding those are really, the goal is to set up those structures at the local level so that as we're all working more across offices and across programs, that there's a structure there, an opportunity to be able to collaborate and figure it all out, similar to how we've got our state level partnership, making sure that those local level connections are just super critical in working through the things that will come up as we're working across programs. So those are a couple of things that are ahead. And I feel like I would be remiss if during a presentation on E1MN, we didn't stress the importance of dual enrollment. So as Amanda mentioned earlier, one of our key strategies with E1MN is encouraging employment service providers to enroll across waiver and VRS and SSB programs. And there's really a lot of benefits to that dual enrollment. For people receiving services, being able to access like a continuity of services of employment supports, so that they're, because someone's switching funding streams, they're getting into that job search phase, they're not having to change their service provider because that back end funding change is happening. So being dually enrolled allows providers to deliver the full continuum of employment supports. And it's also an opportunity as a provider, when we have dually enrolled providers, we've created like a tag on minnesotahealth.info to flag those service providers who are able to deliver services across waiver and VR programs for case managers and people as they're looking at service providers. So there's benefits. We've got some information on enrolling with VR SSB, as well as a recorded webinar in the provider training section of that E1MN training and events page. So again, I'll get into that in 1 second, but just really to stress, I think there's benefits for organizations as well as for our statewide, employment support system in having that shared network of providers and getting a really good employment service providers enrolled in both programs. Okay, so really conscious trying to leave some time today so that we can address questions. But to flag a couple of resources to be aware of, one is we've got an E1MN website, as well as a training and events page on there, an FAQ page, and then the work toolkit on the Disability Hub. So these are really 4 critical pieces, 4 critical resources, and I will see if I can get out of the PowerPoint slide right now and pull up the web pages so that you can see. All right. So right now I'm at the main landing page for the Disability Hub MN. And the place that we want to go to access these resources and tools is the work toolkit. It's in the For Professionals section of the Disability Hub. You'll see there's a few toolkits here. Informed Choice has some really great videos on Informed Choice if you want to check that out. But the work toolkit is right here. As you get in, it's got 7 sections, and you'll notice one of them is our E1MN partnership. So I'm going to start there. This page is really the go-to place for everything E1MN and staying up to date. It's got some overview information, talks about what we're doing with stakeholder engagement and the outcomes of that engagement, as well as a frequently asked questions page. So our FAQs are here, and what we've done is basically when we've been doing coffee chats, we've been asking people to submit questions ahead of time. We address them during the coffee chats, and then we're taking those questions and uploading them to this FAQ page. So although we're going to be stopping coffee chats, and we've actually, we've only got a couple questions for our September one, so it's probably going to be a shorter one. But moving forward, this FAQ is going to be a great resource for accessing, like, hey, how does customized employment fit into all of this? Or what about CDCS, consumer directed community supports? So that's the FAQ page. There's a training and events page, and a couple of things to really, flag here. I know we've got a question submitted around case manager training and lead agency awareness. So this is a really great resource to be aware of. First is this core training. This E1MN core training, again, it's pre-recorded. People can view it on demand and download slides. But this provides sort of the basics of the E1MN partnership for everyone, for service providers, case managers, VRS and SSB staff. So this is a great starting place if people don't know about E1MN or that engage, plan, find, keep framework. We also have information on the E1 PBA or a webinar link, and then as well as a webinar we conducted in April around the benefits of becoming dually enrolled in the process of dual enrollment across programs. And then some information on 245D roundtable discussions that I think are happening now. For case manager trainings, really the way that we've been approaching training for case managers, we've got all these resources. And it's a lot of information. And so to help break it up, we took sections of the support planning learning community webinar, or the SPPLC. And during each monthly webinar, we addressed part of the engage, plan, find, keep framework and talked about, what does that mean? What does a case manager's role look like in that phase? So this is a really going here. You can see resources for case managers on training. And then, as I mentioned before, coffee chats down here. We'll one more coffee chat, but if you'd like to register for September 23rd or submit a question for that coffee chat, you can do so at this page. All right, I know we've got about 15 minutes left, so I'm going to be really quick here, but one more section that I want to highlight is the supporting people on waivers section of the work toolkit. This area provides, it takes the engage, plan, find, keep framework, and it talks about under each of those phases, what are the services? How does that look like? What are resources and tools to support people in that phase? We're working on the content for the engage and keep sections, but we wanted to get the plan and find out really quick because that's where a lot of this, interagency collaboration and maybe some changes in processes and resources are happening right now. So if you go into the plan section, it'll talk about the plan phase of employment development services, what the outcomes of that service are, what are activities that you can be doing. We have this selecting a service provider, which again will provide a link to duly enrolled providers in Minnesota Health, and then information on the employment portfolio, which is something that's coming out of that plan phase and helping kind of jumpstart that person's job search. So talking about what that is, what it looks like, what are some tools available there. And we don't have time today, but there's a lot of really great resources in the vault for those of you that are familiar with My Vault and the Disability Hub MN, but great online resources where people can create these tools or fill out these tools virtually and share them with their team. So it hopefully is a good resource in helping with those seamless transitions between programs and keeping a person's employment team all on the same page. Information on how to work with VRS and SSB in this phase. And then likewise, there's information on the find phase, a similar kind of set of content, but tailored towards that find phase. So that's the work toolkit on the Disability Hub. I'd love to go into more detail on parts of it, but again, I think we got 15 minutes left. Want to save some time for questions. So I'll pull this down. We have question time. Amanda, I apologize. I think I lost our three pre-set up questions. I'm going to work on the, I think I have an outdated version of our slides. So maybe if we can just verbally address the questions, if that's all right. We did have them up on slides, but I think my version of the PowerPoint doesn't have them on there. So I'll take the first question. So we received 3 questions ahead of time. So what we'd like to do right now is we'll address those 3 questions, and then maybe we can open it up for more questions as we go through. So the first one that we received is, could you speak to how to support individuals who are accessing services through Rule 185 in the context of E1MN? We have 2 cases now where the individual needs continued job coaching and are not waivered. What if the county is willing to only do limited hours for employment services and job coaching after the PDA is complete? How do we ensure that non-waivered individuals are getting the support that they need to be successful? The response to this question is, because people receiving Rule 185 case management are not receiving waiver services, they sort of fall outside of our initial E1MN target population, which was focused on waiver services and VRS and SSB and school supports as well. So as such, there wasn't a change in the process for accessing job search services or ongoing supports to maintain employment. One option here you might look at, which I think Kim and Dee might be addressing later, is the extended employment program for ongoing supports for people who need those supports and do not receive waiver services. Another note here for people in Rule 185 case management is if they do have a need for ongoing supports to maintain employment, so they got a job and need those supports to keep it, you might consider revisiting the person's need for waiver services at that time. So understanding that someone might not be eligible for medical assistance if they're receiving Rule 185 case management. But just as a note, consider connecting the person with benefits planning resources, like through the hub, or if they're working with VRSSB in that case. The next question that we got is that we continue to hear from case managers that they don't know about the E1MN program and the new requirements. It is difficult to move forward with the implementation and compliance because of this. How soon will this be rectified? And so a couple of notes here. So first, in responding to this question, it's important to recognize that lead agencies are responsible for training case managers in order for them to successfully execute their job. So if you're identifying a training need for a case manager, really communicating that need to the lead agency you're working with is really important. A second strategy here is those resources that I just went through on the Disability Hub MN are a really great place to point case managers. If they're not if you're coming across someone who's not familiar with E1MN, pointing to that core training and that whole training and events page is a great resource in looking at those. Moving forward and thinking, all right, so we know that there's some gaps in knowledge here, and we're hearing that, I think, from more, and I know we've heard it from our VR colleagues as well. Like, what does that look like moving forward? And so I mentioned before, hopefully those regional collaboration meetings will be another place where we can re-emphasize the importance of E1MN and collaboration. We've started an employment first e-list. I think the advertisement for that went out the other week, and our first communication will be coming out in a couple weeks for that employment first e-list. And let's see what else, keeping an eye out for those pre-recorded trainings when those are published are another good opportunities, and looking at those regional meetings. So there's some stuff coming up ahead that should hopefully help and allow us to continue reinforcing the importance of E1MN and resources behind it for case managers. But there's also a lot of resources that are available right now as lead agencies are figuring out how do we train our case managers in supporting employment. All right. So I think we got one more question, and I'll pass it over to Amanda for it.
Thanks, Ryan. The third question that we received is, could you please comment on what you anticipate to be the impact on rates for providers of the E1MN changes? At our organization, so far it seems that we will be reimbursed less under the waiver system for the same services we previously provided and were reimbursed for under VR. This makes it challenging for us to provide access to these critical services. And so the response would be, it's our hope that providers will be able to leverage and sequence services funded under the waiver and VRS in ways that are not creating undue hardships. So while a provider will provide services under Engage and Plan, and again, this is for somebody that has a waiver, it'll be funded by the waiver instead of maybe VRS or SSB. When they come to VRS, they will receive a higher rate of payment under the E1 PBA. And then also, job coaching has been unbundled from the PBA rate structure, which results in additional hourly billable services for those that will need it. We hope that by sequencing services, it will provide adequate funding for providers to provide employment services to individuals on waivers seeking competitive integrated employment. So I know we've got a little bit of time, so if there are other questions, we're happy to try to do our best to answer those this morning.
And so one strategy here with the questions I would note, so we've got a little bit of time today. I think if we are Julie and Lynn, I don't know if we're collecting questions in writing, but that coffee chat question form, if there's anything we can't address today or we don't have time, we could get questions in through that form and then, or somehow over to Amanda and I, and then we could address anything we're not able to here during that coffee chat webinar next week. But
we'll do that. We try to collect those questions when they're more specific or a little bit longer, a little more complicated in nature when you can't answer them here. So we will collect those in writing, and if we get those, we'll share them there, but we'll also send them to you. We always send them to the group of presenters too for answers. So does anybody have any questions? You guys must have hit it really good because it looks like we don't have questions.
Okay, so while we're waiting, if there's any other questions to come up, but just really to stress that, we've started implementing with E1MN, starting in the first of this month is when those HCPC codes on the waiver end, really the changes. So now case managers will be using the plan and the find phase for employment development services, encouraging that dual enrollment, really keeping an open ear. If there's things that you are seeing that's like, hey, DHS Indeed, it'd be really helpful if you did this, or hey, there's a huge gap, let us know so we can kind of keep our ears to it.
You mentioned this a couple times, Ryan, but a couple of questions that we've gotten from people just comes back to that training. So when you talk about a seamless transition, when we have a VR case manager, maybe who knows what's going on, but our other case manager says E1MN, what are you talking about? We're not going to get seamless, right? And so I know you did mention in a couple different points, you're going to do the videos and things like that, but really active engagement with those case managers to make sure that people can do that successfully. That question comes up a lot. And I know you hit on it a few times, but just a reminder, the more information we can give to those case managers as providers, sometimes we feel like we're teaching people things that they should have learned in a different space, and they shouldn't be getting that information from us, because what if we don't know exactly how you intend to roll that out? So thank you.
Yep. Thanks. Definitely on our radar, as mentioned before, and we'll have some stuff. If you're in the meantime, if you're coming across lead agencies, case managers with that, pointing to that work toolkit and that core training is a great way where you can just say, hey, this is E1MN, you should check this out. And you don't have to get in the business of trying to train. So appreciate it there.
Well, thank you all. We really appreciate the opportunity to provide an update, and let us know if other questions come up, and we're happy to address them, moving forward. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, thank you, everybody. I'm Brian Benchoof. I'm the chair of this kind of weird scenario here. I'm the chair of the, well, are you sure? Are you sure? I'll just bend it over. I'm the chair of the Extended Employment Committee for MOHR, which represents members who have the extended employment services. And it's my pleasure this morning to introduce Kim Babine, who is the Director of Community Partnerships with DEED and the Vocational Rehabilitation Services. So Kim will give us some updates on what's happening with extended employment. Take it away, Kim.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Good morning, everybody. It's so good to see your faces. We wish we were in the room with you. This is Kim Babine. I love that you're all able to be there, and look forward to being in a room with you soon. We are taking the opportunity to share a little bit broader than just extended employment today. So Dee Torgerson, the Director of Vocational Rehabilitation Services, is here, as is Chris McVeigh, who is our Director of Strategic Initiatives at Vocational Rehabilitation Services. So you've got a crew today, and we'll go through a number of different updates, but just wanted to again reiterate how grateful we are to be here, and following up on the other great information this morning. So I'll turn it over to Dee.
Great. Thank you, Kim.
And I'm going to share, just give me just 2 seconds as you get going.
Sure. You can hear me okay? All right, awesome. Well, good to see you all from afar. As Kim said, we wish we could be there in person, and hope you will invite us back again. We know that informal time to connect and talk is really valuable as well. So Dee Torgerson, I am the Director with Vocational Rehabilitation Services, and we know we only have 45 minutes with you today. So we have a whole agenda of updates. We hope that we have some time for questions and answers at the end. But if we do not, please jot those questions down. We'll gather them from your meeting organizers, and we'll make sure that we address those and answer those questions out if we don't have time today, but hopefully we'll have a little bit of time today. So just real quickly, some of the updates that we're going to be providing today. I'm going to talk a little bit about our VRS service delivery strategic overview and some changes we're making in how and where we see the people that we serve. We know there's lots of questions about the state of Minnesota COVID testing vaccination policy. We will go through that with you and spend some time talking about that. And then Chris McVeigh is going to provide our pre-ETS updates, pre-employment transition services. We also want to spend some time talking about For those of you who are not already a provider with VRS, how can you become a provider with VRS? We're always looking for new people to help provide those services. And then, as Brian had mentioned earlier, Kim Babine will be providing some important extended employment updates as well. So I know that we're the ones standing in between you and lunch, so let's get at it. Our VRS service delivery strategic overview. So we had reviewed this more in depth. I know that some of you had attended our August 3rd town hall that we did for partners and advocates. It was a virtual town hall. So I'm just going to be briefly reviewing it today. You can see the full 90-minute presentation on our website under our community partners section. We also have the PowerPoint and the transcript there as well if you want to look through that. So if you're interested in more details than what I'm going to provide today, please refer to that. So when we're talking about our evolving service models, actually we're working with DEED overall in how we provide services, and some of the core principles that we've agreed to move forward with DEED is a focus on equity, centering everything that we do around equity. Also being proactive and meeting people where they are. Flexibility, embracing the opportunity to try new things and learn as we go. So when we look at how VRS can best serve Minnesotans with disabilities, I mean, we've had a lot of changes in recent years due to WIOA and certainly accelerated changes due to COVID-19. And one thing that has not changed for us is our core mission for VRS. So as many of you know, our VRS mission is to empower youth and adults with disabilities to achieve their goals for competitive integrated employment. And so taking what we've learned from COVID-19 and, you know, what we've heard from all of you, what we've heard from participants and disability advocates, we are working to transition to a new model for VRS services that really is grounded in the principles that you see on this slide. Increased choice for our participants. And I know you talked a little bit earlier today about informed choice. Informed choice is very familiar to all of us. It's in our VR federal requirements. However, it's interesting to me that we really have never given choice to participants in how, where, and when they access services. So we really want to build this in and address this as part of our informed choice for the participants that we serve. Person-centered services, you all are very familiar with that. VRS has been working over the past 5 years to really train our staff and embed it in all levels of our organization and into everything that we do. You know, looking at how we're more person-centered versus process-centered. And just an example, you know, how and where we meet with people. We traditionally have had people in our offices, in the career force locations from 8 to 4:30, and people had to come in, schedule an appointment and come in and see us. I mean, that certainly is an example of a process or system-centered service rather than a person-centered service. So looking at how we can, you know, empower the individuals that we work with, of course, to direct the services. And eliminating barriers to services. Just some of the barriers, and you're familiar with these, but we know that the people that we work with have transportation barriers, physical accessibility issues, costs and money issues, perceived physical and psychological safety concerns, mental health issues, time, all of those things interfere with their ability to, you know, physically access many of our sites. We also know that location matters. One of the interesting things that we've heard recently when we've been providing more kind of virtual and remote services is that our cancellation rate has significantly decreased. We typically, I mean, in the past, some offices reported having up to like a 50% cancellation or no-show rate when people had to come into our offices to see people. we know that having those remote services has helped some people with that. We also certainly know remote services are not the only way to provide services, and we still need to be in person, and we plan to do that as soon as we can as well. Increasing outreach and engagement to underserved populations. That's an area we have really struggled with for many years. And we do have a successful model of services for new Americans in the Twin Cities area. It relies heavily on those persons being familiar with, being part of those, having the same backgrounds as the people that we serve. It relies heavily on relationship building and outreach in those targeted communities. And even though that's gone really well in the metro area, we have not had much success, frankly, in doing outreach and services to those same populations around the state. So that's something that we want to work on as well. And just like Kim's going to be talking about additional providers, and how to become a provider with VRS, we absolutely are looking for and needing people willing and skilled in providing services to those targeted populations as well. One of our other core principles is increasing collaboration with agencies and partners. That includes all of you. UNMN is certainly a good example of that. And again, we're just happy to be able to spend some time talking with you today. Increasing accessibility for parents and families. We're providing services to students and who have working families and working parents, and they can also have difficulties accessing our services during limited hours of operation and the physical locations that we have had. Some of the parents that we work with foster or have multiple students with disabilities that they're trying to manage, and we want their active involvement, and we want them to be engaged in the VR process with their students. So, having us to be able having VR, expanding our ability and how we reach out and serve those people has really, really increased the engagement with parents and families. They can hop onto a quick video call with us. We're getting out into the community. We're going to be starting to do some in-home services next year. All of those things are going to help to ensure that we are able to offer more timely and efficient services to those students. And obviously, we want to keep categories of services open. Those of you who've been working with us for a while know that we had most of our categories, 3 of 4 categories of services closed for several years as we made significant program changes due to the unfunded mandates of WIOA. That meant that we were only able to serve those persons with the most significant limitations, and we had thousands of people on a wait list for services. We have all of our categories open since November of 2020, and it is our priority to keep those categories of services open so that we can serve a broader group of people with disabilities. So looking at our VRS service model, and we want to keep the focus on equity, accessibility, and person-centered services, as I've talked about. We're trying to respond to the major changes we've had in state and federal policy. We've had big demographic changes in who we serve. There have been changes in the trends of who we're serving, and we want to, again, adapt our service model to meet those needs. Really the focus for us is on meeting people where they are. And that's, what we've been talking to our staff about and how we can best do that. And so here's some of the ways on this slide about how we want to expand our services. So some of these we've been doing for a while. For instance, high schools, we've always had VRS representatives in every school district and high school across the state. We will continue to do that because we know that that is the best way to serve and to reach those students. We also have rehab reps in all of those high schools providing those pre-ed services or assisting in getting those contracted services set up. Some of the expanded option, we've always met in county offices, colleges, universities, and technical colleges, and we've done some work in the communities, but we really, really want to expand that. We'll continue to have, some of our VRS offices will continue to be in some of the larger career force locations. But where we really want to expand is the remote and virtual services. We have found that has worked really well for some people. Again, not all. So we want to use this whole array of services, but we do want to continue those remote and virtual services. We're going to be launching a Workforce One app. DHS is already using it. State Services for the Blind has already used it. We're launching it soon, fall of 2021. So we're going to be working on that in the next couple of months with our staff and our participants. And that's going to, again, allow greater virtual support and remote connection and communication with those that we serve. Probably one of the newest pieces that we're stepping into is providing some services in participants' homes. So we're going to do a pilot starting next year. It's very new for VR. It's very new nationally for VR, but we think that it's a good way to meet some people's needs. So just talking real briefly about our approach to physical space, and Kim, you can go to the next slide. We really are choosing a space footprint that fits our service delivery model. So we're going to have a combined physical footprint of our lease spaces and career forces and other partner locations, some third-party spaces. And then, of course, we're going to continue to use mobile services. We're really focusing on shifting the costs from those physical spaces, decreasing our overall presence, and shifting some of those cost savings into direct services. Reducing that physical space is a national trend for VR. It's been really interesting to, kind of hear how different states are adapting and moving forward, coming out of, hopefully coming out of soon COVID-19. Some VR services are going, they're not having any physical space. They're having all of their staff teleworking. Some are just going back to how it used to be. We're really going to be doing a bit of a hybrid. We're going to continue to have some physical space, and we're going to be more flexible and also be doing telework with our staff. All right, next slide. So just really quickly in conclusion, we don't have a wait list. All of our categories are open. We're working hard to get that word out. We're doing social media outreach. We've been doing the town halls, other forums. We can't wait to get our feet out into the streets and be doing in-person outreach as well. So we'll continue to work on increasing those coming into our program because we're available for services. We really are working hard at utilizing new learning and digital technologies in order to better serve people. Also increasing our availability and opportunities to connect and meet with partners, families, disability advocates. We certainly are dedicated to sustaining strong partnerships and looking forward to working with all of you more closely as well. Strong business partnerships needed more than ever. We have an opportunity now with businesses that we have never had before. So we have some exciting things in the works around that as well. And again, overall decreasing our physical footprint in order to divert those funds into direct services for people with disabilities, and ultimately keeping our categories of services open long-term. So the next piece we're going to go into, and don't shoot the messenger, please, but state of Minnesota COVID vaccination and testing policy. I mean, as you can see by the fact that we all from the state of Minnesota are virtual, you are there in person, things look different for us right now. And we're working hard to try to comply with the state of Minnesota guidelines regarding COVID. Right now, that prohibits us from non-essential business travel. It also limits our ability to do in-person conferences, meetings, and services. So the most recent requirements, as many of you are aware, include vaccine and COVID testing requirements for all state employees all across the state, and all of our PT contracted providers, professional technical contracted providers, which includes many of you. So I just want to let you know that those PT contracted providers, that includes anybody within who's doing any contracted services for the entire state of Minnesota. So you're not alone in this. We're also, frankly, trying to still figure out how we implement this for our 375 staff just within VRS. And DEED is right now actively working to implement it for 1,800 state employees all across the state. We know that we haven't been able to provide you a lot of notice for this requirement. And we understand that it's going to take some time for your programs to implement new policies to meet this requirement. We will work with you and we will provide needed support to assist you to get there. So with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to Kim Babine, who's our Director of Community Partnerships, to dive into the details around that a little bit more. Thank you.
Thanks, Dee. Again, this is Kim Babine. I think Dee said it best, don't shoot the messenger. In addition to the pieces that Dee already shared, this information I sent out via email. If you're not on that email distribution list, let me know and we'll make sure that you get added so that you're seeing updates as we get them. So, part of the issue here is the Minnesota Management and Budget, the state agency, is the one that issued this policy. There's a lot of interaction with the Department of Administration, Office of State Procurement, that actually technically at the end of the day is responsible for all the professional and technical contracts in the state. And so there's communication between the two of them and then down to DEED and our fiscal and legal department, and then trying to determine what DEED is doing and then what we need to do for VRS. So we've just been trying to get as much information about interpretation of this policy and implementation as possible. So it's still coming. We're still getting clarification based on questions and concerns that we're hearing from all of you. So we'll just be sharing it as we get it and trying to provide you with the best information possible. But at its very basic, the policy applies to, so VRS, you as community partners, those of you who have professional and technical contracts with us, you've got that PT contract, so this applies to you. So it applies to individual employees who are providing in-person services to VRS individuals or are working with other state employees. There's this piece about entering state office buildings for more than 10 minutes. But I think the one that makes sense for most folks is just thinking about providing those in-person services. So if you are providing only virtual services or you're not going on state to a state office building, this would not apply to you. But where this gets tricky is devil's in the details. So we know it applies only to PT contract holders. And so as extended employment providers, or maybe some of you who have other grants through VRS, such as individual placement and supports or other pieces, technically it doesn't apply to the grants, but since most of our grantees through VRS also have PT contracts, it affects your organization. What happens is then you start to look at the individual employee level. So if you have an employee who provides only services through a grant and not providing any VR program services, then you as a community partner don't need to track and maintain data on the proof of vaccination or weekly positive test results for that individual. So if they're only providing, say, let's use extended employment as an example. If they're only providing extended employment services and they don't touch VR program services, then you don't have to track vaccination or positive test results for that individual. Some of you have your staff kind of separated and they provide services only in one area. However, if your staff are not separated in that way, then you do have to track. So if they're providing extended employment services and they provide some job coaching through a VR program contract, then that individual employee you need to be tracking the data for that individual employee. So we've gotten the question about what about our office administrator or receptionist or accountant or, other maybe back office folks. You are only required to track and maintain that data for the individual staff who are providing direct in-person services, again, funded through that state PT contract. So if that office administrator, receptionist, accountant, they likely are not providing those in-person services. So you don't need to be tracking it for those individual employees. So what to document and track? We, community partners need to be looking at the completed attestation forms for all staff that say how they're complying with this policy. We have examples of those attestation forms in that email the first email that I sent out. So if you need that information again, we can get that to you. The emails are also posted online on our community partner site, so you can refer back to that. You'll need to keep copies of the accepted proof of vaccination. So that can be the vaccination card. It doesn't have to, it can be a paper or electronic copy of that vaccination card. There's some specific information if that person was vaccinated in another country. You'll need to document and track a list of staff who will require that weekly testing, and then that testing completion records so that you have those positive test results. Please don't send anything to us at this time. At this time, maintain your own records. I don't anticipate that we will be asking for, we wouldn't be asking for that individual private data. We'll likely need to collect some sort of summary data or attestations from you once we get into monitoring this for compliance with this policy. But that's not happening tomorrow. That's not happening next week. We know that you are developing those policies and getting these things in place. And so stay tuned for what you need from us in the future, but that's not something that you need to be doing right now. So no need to send us anything at this point. So some questions have come up about testing. What about, okay, so all my employees are going to need to find testing. Where do they do that? And what about if they're not symptomatic, or this is what's happening in my town? So the state of Minnesota does have testing sites that they sponsor that are free. They don't require an individual to be symptomatic. So take a peek at this link that I have for you. It's also in those emails that I've sent out. There's testing options. There's free at-home tests. And we know that those are expanding based on this, this mandate, as well as some of the other things that are happening, at the federal level. There's more need for this testing. And so I anticipate it to continue to be easier and easier to access those tests. If you have questions, I'm very happy to announce that we have a team of 4 community partnerships program specialists on my team who work specifically on the VR program, PT contracts, services related to the VR program. So previously it had been Ann Paulson, then Sarah Sundin joined her a little over a year and a half ago. And then Janine Oyen and Jess Othwaite have joined the team as well. So Janine Oyen was previously a VR tech in the Brooklyn Park office, and Jess Othwaite was most recently a counselor in the St. Cloud Alexandria office. So we've got just a great team, and they're digging into the details on this. So if you have questions, feel free to give them a call. We have separated in the past. We had Ann and Sarah had certain providers that they were assigned to. We started referring to them as their portfolios of providers. So you had like a go-to person. When Janine and Jess came on in a temporary status, they joined Ann and Sarah with those portfolios. We're in the process right now of splitting into 4 portfolios. So you will have, you might have a new one coming up here, but you can always reach out to whoever you're most comfortable with or who you know a little better, and they might bring in another one of their colleagues. But you can email me, all four of them, one of them, whatever works for you until we kind of get into a rhythm here. They're all ready to help. So they're just a great team. I hope you find it that to be that way as well. So that's the COVID vaccination policy. I'm sure you have lots of questions, but we'll keep going through the presentation and then we'll answer any questions that you have, or we'll take any questions that you have. I might not have answers for them all with that policy, but we'll do the best we can. So I'll turn it over to Chris for some pre-its updates.
Thanks, Kim. Yes, I'm wanting to share with the MOHR group about DEED VRS's efforts relating to pre-employment transition services for students. And that includes both eligible students, those who have open VRS cases, as well as those younger students that are potentially eligible for pre-employment transition services. And so we'll go to the next slide.
I'm sorry, something happened and there we go.
Okay, yeah, so the focus of pre-employment transition services is to provide an early start to career exploration. What Congress and RSA, our federal funder, intended and has asked all of the state VR programs across the nation to build is to allow students with disabilities to identify career interest and to do it at an early age. And so we have been building and building and building that in our state on the DEED VRS side. And we need our community partners to help get this work done. There are, maybe go to the next slide, Kim. The 5 required pre-its activities. And for many of you who have a professional technical contract already developed with DEED VRS for pre-ed services are aware of these 5 required activities. And they include the job exploration counseling, work-based learning, counseling on post-secondary education options, workplace readiness training, and instruction in self-advocacy. When we are talking about exploration, helping students explore their options in careers, WIOA really turned exploration and the assessment piece on its head, and the public VR program has needed to come along with that. So when we've talked about how we identify or assess a student's or a person's ability to work in a particular career, we've typically done that through assessment. And really what we're doing now is focusing on the exploration portion. So rather than evaluate, estimate, appraise, analyze, and recommend from a third party, whether it be a VRS counselor or a community partner vocational evaluator, rather we're asking the student and that employer to give us feedback on what they thought about the experience. And so we're looking at words such as search, consider, inquire, journey, and adventure. We really want students at that young age to be thinking about, and in high school, so that's really starting at age 14, be thinking about and trying work, exploring work. That includes, of course, job tours, talking to employers in particular career industries, having short-term work experiences, internships, that sort of thing is really what we're doing to infuse that thinking into students, get them thinking and experiencing and exploring and talking to people who are working in particular industries that they may have interest in. So with the exploration experiences, the goal is that the students would understand their interests and gain work-related skills, that students have the opportunity for self-reflection and gaining insight into their interests and their skills and abilities and what they want to be when they grow up, essentially. A summary of what was liked, disliked, and learned. So this is coming from the student themselves. Tell us what you learned from this experience. What did you take away from having this job tour or talking to this manager of a particular industry? That's really turning things on its head, you know, based on my experience working in VR for over 25 years. And it's really the intention of what PREATS is all about, helping the students take that ownership and that leadership in having influence and say in their career futures or their employment futures. And then with support of the vocational rehabilitation program, the counselors, the special ed teachers, and our community partners, what do they do with that? With what they've learned, what can I do with that information? We're the experts, and we want to be able to infuse that back to that person and their team of people that care for that person and know about their interests, skills, abilities, and dreams of what they, again, thinking about and dreaming about careers and employment in the future. So we have a few slides here that really lay out what VRS has been doing in making sure that pre-employment transition services are available to the over 45,000 students in Minnesota that are either eligible for pre-ed services or potentially eligible for pre-ed services. Typically in years past, we would say to high schools, you know, we only work with people that are in their last year of high school or in their junior or senior year of high school. That is true, especially for individuals that want to move forward and open a case file with VRS and be served through our traditional way that we serve and support people. With the potentially eligible, we have pre-employment transition services representatives that are going out to the same schools and reaching out to that younger group of people. And through classes, through group activities, tours, and other types of that get at those 5 required work pre-ed activities are helping those students explore. So what I mainly want to show you, and I'm sure that this PowerPoint is going to be available to all of you, is what kind of an investment VRS is making in ensuring that pre-ed services are available to those students. We are hiring staff. I think you'll see that whether it's the northern region, and Kim, you can just kind of flow right through these, the metro region and the southern region, which includes part of the metro, we have staffed up significantly, and many of them are pre-ed representatives. Others of them are placement coordinators with the pre-employment transition focus. And their whole effort is to identify those students on the part of the reps. And then on the part of the placement coordinators is to identify the businesses that are open to hosting students and providing those learning opportunities. The very most important piece of this, beyond our own staffing to support these students, is our community partners being the ones to make those connections, whether it's the students to those classes or those services that are part of those 5 required activities, or whether it's being the entity that coordinates that job tour, that job shadow, the work experience itself. We need you as our community partners. Many of you have already amended your professional technical contracts to include pre-ed services. But we know that there are areas of the state where we have no capacity to deliver those services, yet we have pre-ed representatives and placement staff that are needing those community partners to step in and to support. I'd like to encourage that even those of you that might be in other areas of the state, if you can deliver these services virtually, this is also part of what we need to do to make the pre-ed services available to students throughout Minnesota. I lead this effort around pre-eds. Alyssa Klein is our transition and pre-eds coordinator. We are going to be staffing up to 56 full-time positions in our program that are going to be engaging with schools, identifying these students, and we need you. And so I just wanted to put that out there. It's a way for our community partners to connect with those students well in advance of them ending their either high school or transition years, for you to get to know them as well. But we're really excited about what can happen in the 2021-22 school year. So I'm going to hand it back to Kim, and thank you for your time.
Thanks, Chris. This is Kim. I wanted to include a few slides, and I'll go more quickly through them and you can refer back to them. I know that Ryan and Amanda touched during the E1MN presentation about being a dual provider. And I wanted to include just a little bit more information for those of you who are not a VRS community partner with the VR program. wanted to just share a little bit more information about how you can think about maybe thinking about the program and about whether or not you might want to come on board as a VR program community partner. So really, if I was you, if I was a 245D provider and not yet a provider with VRS, I would think about questions like, what is the VR program? Who are you people? How does the VR program work with community partners? Obviously, it's different than the relationship that DHS as the licensing entity for 245D works with partners, different than lead agencies work with partners. I'd ask questions about how can my organization or business become a community partner and start to provide those services? How do I even receive business if I'm a partner? How do I bill for services I provide? And what do I need to think about to become a VR partner? So we've answered those questions to the best of our ability on our VRS website. We've got a community partner guide just for the VR program that has this information. So encourage you to access that if you're thinking about it. This again went over in the E1MN presentation, but just we set up these PT contracts so that our staff then purchase services from organizations and businesses such as our job search services that comes through a performance-based agreement. And then we also have just hourly services for a bunch of other services. And again, information about those services and how where there might be a statewide standardized rate is available on our website there. Again, if you're thinking about it, if you have questions, you just want to know more, those 4 program specialists that I talked about before are ready and willing and excited to talk with you. So just feel free to reach out to one or all of them or me, and I can get you in touch with them, and they'll just call you, have a FaceTime or a Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting with you just to talk about what we do, or to move further in the process about pursuing applying and pursuing a contract with us. So they're there ready to meet with you and talk with you. And then wanted to give just a few updates on extended employment. So there's a lot happening with extended employment, basically because of the flexibilities that we put in place with COVID. So coming off of state fiscal year 20, we're now in state fiscal year 21, and we extended these flexibilities through the contract that just started in July. So we're in state fiscal year 22 for your grants, for those of you who are EE grant holders. There's 3 different flexibilities that we put in place. One was about EE eligibility and those individuals who are also on a medical assistant MA waiver. So one of the pieces in the new rule said that if an individual has a waiver, that they are not eligible for EE. That is in line with what is happening with E1MN and Explore, Plan, Find, Engage, Plan, Find, Keep. And the whole idea of that is that we want to make sure that that the EE funds are used for individuals who don't have access to other funding. So that is a piece that was put in the rule, but there's a lot of work that you as providers need to do to adjust to that. And so we've pushed that out, and that is going through this current year. The underproduction penalty is an issue with COVID. It's also an issue with E1MN as things, as people switch to being, receiving their funding through the waiver as opposed to the extended employment program. That affects your contracts and the amount that you can earn. Usually it's the use it or lose it. And if you don't complete or earn your full contract, that there's a penalty and your contract is reduced. We have said we're not going to reduce contracts based on production for this current year, state fiscal year 2022. And then there's also the requirement for 2 in-person visits per month. With COVID, of course, that was not necessarily possible and is still not necessarily possible. And so the 2 visits per month are still required, but they do not have to be in person. You just have to still document that the visits took place virtually. Each of those we said would go through June of next year. And we haven't made a decision about what's going to happen July 1 of next year for the next grant year cycle. I've started to engage with some EE providers. I'll do that more broadly this fall to discuss the impacts of those and what we think those things should look like moving forward in the next fiscal year grant cycle. So no decisions are made at this point, but if you would, as EE providers, think about and work with your staff to gather information about the impacts of how those are going, what the impacts have been, what's happened with those 2 in-person visits. Has it been successful? Has that been really, some individuals have really benefited from the flexibility and the choice there? Are there what are you seeing in terms of best practices about when that should happen, when virtual is okay, when in-person should happen? And then, all the impacts around the eligibility piece. How do you see the transition moving to implementing that rule going? What are the things that you need? What are the things that we need to consider? So I'll be doing some different ways to reach out to all of you to be able to gather that information. But if you would start working with your staff now, then you'll be prepared for some of those questions. So I'll turn it over to Dee. We can also, I know we've used most of our time, but I'll turn it over to Dee for wrap up.
Thanks, Kim and Chris. Again, just thank you again for having us. We hope we're invited back again next time and can be with you in person. We look forward to some of that more informal engagement with all of you as well. Please reach out to any of us with any questions that you have. If you want to take a couple minutes for questions, we're open to that. If you're ready for lunch, I get that. It's been a long morning. We're okay either way, but I'll leave it to you. But if you could at least, if you have those questions, if you've written some things down, we would love it if the coordinator could get those back to us, and we will respond to the group then with those questions. So I'll leave it up to you where you want to go from here.
So let me just take a read in the room if we have questions, but thank you so much for presenting and sharing that information. We will definitely get any questions we have in writing to you. So anybody have something specifically you want to ask? I think we're hungry. We're going to go to lunch.
Yeah,
Thank you
I
so
get that.
much.
Thanks again.
Nice
Good
to see everybody.
Good to see you all.
Good
from
to
far.
see you all.
Thank you,
Have
everybody.
a good day.
They're just setting up lunch. So the lunch will be right outside in the hallway. I don't think it's quite done yet. So you get a minute or two and then we're going to eat back in this room. So